application. Now, you can see right now it's not very exciting looking, but the only data layer that's turned on is the county boundary at this point and a base map. I saw Joel in the email that he sent out. There's this tool over here for the layer list. And so all you would have to do is open this dialog up, and then you could start turning on whatever data. So like here's that first data layer that we really produced for the group, which was the no through trucks. And it shows all of that data. So, and then you have the ability over here on the right up in here. I'm not sure if you're seeing my cursor, so I'm going to try to use my control key as well. You can type in an address in here. So I could type in something like 400 Washington. I can type it without the R, but I can't say it without the R. And it will automatically hit enter, take you to that. Or I can type in an intersection if you're interested in a location like that. All I have to do is to separate the road name by a ampersand. And it will then move me to a location like Chesapeake, Washington and Chesapeake. So sometimes you might get some choices over here. You just got to pick the one you want. But that's how the navigation works. This button allows you to zoom in. This button here allows you to zoom out, or you can just drag your mouse around. All I'm doing is clicking and holding the mouse, and it's moved around. So most of the, not most, all of the data that I've been using to deliver maps and stuff like that are all right here in the in this application. So, and then if you wanted to use this for other purposes, you also could add data, and this gives you access to 160 or 70 data layers from the county. And then if you wanted to send me a little a set of data, and you wanted to say, hey, Doug, I really think this should be a truck route, I can draw a line on here and then say I want that to be a truck route from here to here. You could take a screenshot of that and then send me that graphic, and then the work group then in theory would consider that for future consideration. So so you've got the ability to draw on here. You can't hurt any of what's here, so just have fun playing with it and go from there. There is a print button that allows you to print locally. There is a button here to change the base map, so if you want to see imagery or something like that. And you actually also can put bookmarks in here. So if you wanted to, if you wanted to do a one-on-one WebEx with me, you could create some bookmarks, and then we could wander through that as we went on. So does anyone have any questions about the application? Okay, so have fun playing with that. So I'm back on my home machine. I'm going to just use, not my home machine, I'm back on my work machine, but I'm just going to work from the ArcGIS Pro application rather than the WebEx, because this will be a little bit faster for us. So what I've got turned on already, just so you can see, is I've turned on, I have the Baltimore City routes already on the map so that we can see how they interconnect with the state routes. I'm showing the manufacturing zoning that shows, kind of the areas of interest that we've got. And then what I've also got turned on is the no through trucks layer for the areas in Baltimore County where there's a restriction in place. So, and then I've also got this data layer ready to rock and roll for us for state roads. So I guess one question I had, and I don't know if this is more of a Lewis and an Armand question or the whole group, but one of the things that I mapped, if I go back to kind of the beginning here, one of the things that I mapped were the state truck restrictions, and you can see they're coming in with this black dotted line, so to speak. Some of the state restrictions are a little difficult to interpret, but there's already a system in place. My question is, there's already a system in place that the trucking industry needs to follow to figure out where they can move loads across the Maryland landscape. And I don't know, I think for our exercise in trying to figure out our routes, it's important to know where these are, but I don't know that we want to try to replicate this in the future because the state changes these kind of at will, and then they don't always notify us directly. There's a data set that, or not even a data set. There's a PDF that goes out on a website, but that's I would have to go out and discover that to keep this information up to date. So what are your thoughts on using this data to kind of plan our proposed routes, but not maintaining that data going into the future since the state already has that system?
Well, I think it's applicable if you're looking at the truck routes within Baltimore County, you know, that a company would want to know all of the, you know, for convenience, it's great to go to one place, specifically the county that you're going to operate in, and have a map of all the restrictions. In this case, you know, the states as well.
Okay.
Understanding your problem, yeah, I would definitely agree with including the state data as we have it now. And if nothing else, it would make us aware that the data exists, even if they don't push it to us or to you.
Okay.
You know, for future versions, but it's definitely worthwhile to include.
Okay. So I'll add that to my maintenance plan, is to try to, one, fix any misinterpretations I've got of the state data, and then come up with a method to periodically look at the state website to try to keep this up to date then. Because there are some parts of their data that would influence. So if we made a kind of a blanket statement and said we're going to use all state roads as trucking routes, they've got some state roads that already have some type of restriction on them. So, and I don't know that I had talked to Joel earlier about the possibility of getting the law office basically to get us a disclaimer that would state something along the lines that while we may present it as a restriction or not being restricted, that the state the state system trumps our data, because they're the authoritative source for their data, not Baltimore County. So
right, yeah, that's understood.
Okay. So then, with all of that said, I will just.
Doug, I have a general question that Armand or Louis may know. What goes into the state restricting their particular highways? Do you know?
More than likely, and I don't know exactly. I can definitely get back with the details, or Louis can. However, more than likely, it's a width restriction or a weight restriction. That for some reason, it may be considered a state road, but for whatever reason, it wasn't built to the current weight classification.
Yeah, the other one that's out there is height restrictions, where you're going underneath of an overpass. There's actually more of them seem to be height restrictions than anything else. And then, of course, like the one they've got on 83 up here, if I go back to where I was, this one on 83 is a width restriction due to it's a temporary width restriction because of ongoing construction. So that, you know, that's the other thing, is there's temporal aspects to this data where it's not always going on. It's only going on because right now there's some type of construction. So
just to chime in, there's also a few that have been put in due to residential complaints that the state responded to and put some restrictions in.
Okay, that's good to know.
So then starting down in the Sparrows Point area, and so we've got all these areas that are, and I'm going to turn off the city data just for a little bit, just to kind of get rid of some of the, what I perceive as being clutter on the map right now, unless there's objections, is I want to turn that off just so it doesn't overwhelm us, and then turn on the state roads. And so I guess one question I've got is, do we want to just and basically say that all interstates are truck routes? Is that a fair statement?
Yes, I think so.
Okay. And I'm going to take some notes, but I just, I'm just trying to set myself up for success for my next steps from here. So then once again, and I'll turn.
Let me
ahead.
ask a question here. Greg, what's your feedback on that? I know you're very concerned about us having conversation with SHA.
I'm sorry, what was the question, Deandra?
I said, what was your feedback on that? Because I know that you have concerns about us having conversation with SHA.
Yeah, I mean, I think interstates are fine, but we get into some of these other roads, I think the state would want to know. Certainly, if we
Okay.
get into talking about posting them and things like that, we have to get them involved.
Okay. That was
So
easy.
then- Good. I like easy. So the roads here in red, and if I first turn off the restrictions for a second, all of the roads here in red are state roads. So they've been mapped to the inventory of state roads in the county. And the one concern I've got is this road right here that's got already got some type of state restriction on it. So that one might be something with a question mark. But otherwise, are there any objections to making all the roads up to, I guess that's what, 150 up there? Yeah, up to 150. Any objections to making all of these roads at the southern end of the county perceived as truck routes? So we'd have, in addition to the interstate down here, we'd have access out of Sparrows Point. We'd have access out, and I don't know all the location names, so you'll have to bear with me, but we'd have access out of the different manufacturing areas, getting us up at least as far to 150.
So it seems like they all have access out, so which means they would have access into all of the industrial areas if we recommended this, is what you're saying.
Yes.
And
So-
the one that you took off, Doug, sorry, go ahead.
Say again?
I was just gonna, this is Armand. I was gonna ask Doug, point out the black state restriction, the black dotted line, that overlaid the red, right. I believe, if I'm looking at the map correctly, that's Peninsula Highway. I
Yes.
was actually unaware of the state restriction there, but, yeah, we definitely want to include that, and I appreciate you including that in your map. We don't have any objection. It's, you know, to us, it's a secondary route, not necessarily the primary route to Sparrows Point, but with more and more trade, especially from the port, with an origin or destination in Sparrows Point, specifically destination. A secondary route to that location is very important. We'll look into the state restriction that they have in place separately, but we definitely want to include that in the
Okay,
route.
yeah.
And it's a
note that-
major roadway.
The note that I've got in my data is, it says no moves over Bear Creek. And so I don't know if that's a weight restriction or what it is, but it's, you know, I'd have to bring up the source material that I use from the state to
Okay.
generate this.
No, well, I appreciate the offer. We'll check it
Sure.
out. Yeah, I
Okay.
wasn't aware of a weight restriction over the bridge, but
Right.
I don't know.
I was gonna say the
Yeah.
exact same thing, but that's a T route rather than using Wise Avenue, which is a parallel route there. So Peninsula is huge. Keep that as a truck route.
I
Yeah,
will tell you,
it's always struck me as one of those routes that's like over-engineered for its usage. You know, the history I understand, it was originally constructed to facilitate commuters in and out of Sparrows Point back in the day. It
Right.
was rebuilt right when Sparrows Point was the mill was kind of faltering, and it's a great roadway, and it would definitely a little superfluous, you know, for it's not the most efficient route into Sparrows Point, specifically from the point, from the port, but it does look rather underutilized, and yes, it does parallel the other road. So, Doug.
so I was going to say, I will tell you, when I mapped these state restrictions, I didn't want to say I expanded the restriction, but I mapped the restriction from major road to major road. I didn't just like say, okay, we're going over Bear Creek, so I'm just going to show a little piece over Bear Creek. I basically had to go back out to where, you know, I'm not going to try to route people through neighborhoods and stuff like that. So that's why some of these may look a little big when, you know, all the restriction really is don't go over Bear Creek. So but that wouldn't stop somebody from, coming out of Sparrows Point and going up to the creek, or somebody that's up in this area right here, you know, going down, and somebody in this subdivision going up. It's just to go over the creek. So that's why
So
I
you
was
took a
kind of asking.
little literary license, I guess, huh?
Yeah, I'm a cartographer. We get a lot with maps. So, okay, so those areas going then. So the next area we were going up above 150. Do you see any issues with using 150 as a route? And so I guess my question is, any of the roads here that are in red, any issues with any of those? And I guess I should turn on interstates, because unfortunately US 40 shows up as an interstate, not as a
State road.
state road.
Yeah. Oh, that's
So-
what was happening.
Yeah.
I got to tell you, Doug, this is a killer map. I
Thank
mean, this thing is unbelievable.
And this is what the county pays me to do. So I get to play, you know, and
Okay.
I consider this playing. So like this restriction here is a vertical clearance restriction. That's this restriction here that's on Route 40. So, you know, it's probably a 14.3, 14.6 type of thing. So, and DeAndrea, I don't know for us if part of maybe what we want to do when we're looking at our legislative agenda and what transportation projects we want the state to do, it might be to eliminate some of these, especially the vertical obstructions on what we perceive to be our proposed truck routes. You know, because like they're doing the work down on my side of the county over on, you know, the southbound side of 695, and they did half of the Ingleside Avenue bridge overpass, but they didn't do the other half. So there's still the vertical restriction there. So there might be another way to use this data in the future. So if we consider that all these state roads are truck routes with no objections, I'll move on. This would give me cause to offer up right here. So Maryland 150 comes out here to Ebenezer Road. And then, so one of my questions, and it goes beyond the state road question, is do we need to consider some of the local roads, the arterials and the collectors, as potential truck routes? So would we want to open up Ebenezer Road here over to US 40, over to, I guess that's, I'm not even sure what that is, because there's Bel Air Road. This must be Philadelphia Road. Over to Philadelphia Road. Do we want to consider opening that up as a proposed truck route?
I could throw an opinion on that, Doug. That's a total residential area through there.
Okay.
And if we post that as a truck out, they will go crazy. So my recommendation is no, don't touch
Okay.
that one.
Yeah, so, but that's I think that's kind of a next step. After we decide on state roads, we've got to look at our arterials and our collectors to say, you know, what do we do with this?
Yeah, because what we talked about yesterday, Doug, was that 43. That
Yes.
black line on the 40 shouldn't be there. That isn't
Um,
okay for trucks there.
I looked this one up after we talked about it a little bit, and what I remember from the document is that and this is where it was really vague. The document itself, and I'm trying to open it up as we speak here. It'll just take me a second. And you're not seeing what I'm doing on my other screen, so I'm going after the source material for that. And so here's that document that comes off of the, and it's pretty far down in this document. So there's all the green ones there are all the vertical clearance roads. So you can see there's a lot of them in the state. And where was the stuff just for the county? Maybe it's in this other document.
I think they say Baltimore next to it, don't they? Ones in the Baltimore County.
Yeah, and for me they're all highlighted. So
There you go, Baltimore County.
yeah, but I'm still not finding 43 yet. Must be in that first document.
What else it might be, Doug? It may be a temporary restriction that shows up on there, because I know it's posted from the Beltway to Route 1 as the restricted route.
So they say this is what I attempted to map. They said no permit loads Maryland 43 beyond I-695. And so that meant to me that it's from the Beltway all the way to the end of what I know to be Maryland 43. You know,
Yeah.
and that's why I say it's hard for me to do the interpretation without knowing some of the history and
Yeah,
stuff.
I can just tell you it's posted from 695 to Route 1, and that's it.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, and that's an easy correction on the map, but it doesn't jive with the state is saying,
Yep.
you know, in that document that I've got.
But
So-
when we open that up, it shows that we don't need Ebenezer as a route if that 43 is open.
Okay,
That's
cool.
why I was making a deal of it.
Yeah. Okay. So I think we're
Sorry,
up here
before
to-
we move on for documentation purposes, I just wanted to clarify something.
Okay.
I saw that, so you turned the interstates on. Were you trying to reflect a specific interstate route for the inclusion of the preferred routes, or all of the interstate routes are also being included as preferred routes?
I think we decided earlier on all the interstates, and I'm going to expand that to include the US routes. So Route 1, Route 40, I guess those are the only two US routes we've got in the county, and US 1, and then all of the interstates. So the one.
Great,
the
thank you.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so at this point, I'll turn back on the city data just to see if there's anything along this east boundary that we want to go in and try to consider more. So, you know, if we're saying Route 1, US 1, that's going to connect up to this. If we go down here, we've got all this interstate going on. We've got this state road coming in, this state road coming in. But the only one that we don't have any resolution on that I can see is either Wise Avenue or whatever. Let me zoom in a little bit on this street. So the city's got routes coming out here. I don't know if we want to, from a local perspective, or maybe just make a note of it that we want to consider future consideration for Halliburtt Avenue, which would connect into this set of roads right here from the city. And whether we want to consider Dundalk Avenue. Let me just make sure that doesn't have a county restriction on it. No, Dundalk and Halliburtt are both open from a county perspective. So those are and let me just.
Yeah, that I wouldn't include them in a restriction. They serve a multitude of purposes.
Right. But do we want to, just so that we've got, you know, consistency going between the city and the county, you know, if somebody's driving along this road, Halliburtt Avenue in the city, we don't want to necessarily say, no, you got to stop and turn around. You know, so in theory, we want to consider this local road of Halliburtt Avenue and potentially this chunk of Dundalk Avenue.
Right, because they can't get there and stop, is what
Right.
you're saying.
Right, exactly.
So I will note that Dundalk, it looks like is a local route flowing into it, not that's like a blue on the city side.
Right.
So that for us would be, maybe we don't necessarily mark Dundalk as a don't go here, but it's not a main, like, you know, if you're not doing a local delivery on the city side right there, then the trucks aren't supposed to be there.
Right.
So-
And just to clarify, if I could ask a quick question, the red on the city side is restricted, correct?
No, the red on the city side is the through truck route is what they
Through
call it.
truck route.
So this
Okay.
this red here is a through truck route. This blue is a local truck route. This green is a time restricted, no trucks 7 a.m. to 7 p.m.
Gotcha.
So, and I hope our community folks, either Ron or Pete, will weigh in with any objections if things are objectionable to them. But I would think that Dundalk might be a prime candidate just to leave alone if the industry folks think that whatever that is going through the port is a good way to direct folks otherwise. So just any feedback folks have on that.
I agree with you, Captain. That's a key one, especially Halliburtt too.
Yeah, Halliburtt as well. You know, Dundalk, It also gives you access to I-895 if you mind the 7 to 7 restriction on, I guess that's Kane Street, the green.
This one here?
Correct.
Sorry, this, you probably can't see my cursor, so I'm gonna have to use the control key.
Yeah, no, I got you.
Okay.
So yes, you know, I would leave that alone. Primarily the objection and the reason of the 7 to 7 restriction was the heavy residential zone along Kane, and that was the reason for that 7 to 7 restriction that was negotiated years ago. So yeah, port traffic, you know, generally is after 7 a.m. and before 7 p.m. So yeah, we need to keep Dundalk open.
Okay.
Right, in Halliburton Avenue, I definitely do not want to make it a restriction because if you remember, part of our problem is people turning right past Squires and going down Towers Point,
Yep.
which we're trying to avoid.
Mhm.
Definitely, you know, allow Halliburton to be a route, even if we're not calling it that.
Yep.
So that makes sense.
Okay, so as we wander around close to the city, I'll turn this on and off to, you know, give us some idea that we might need to be looking at, you know, connections between the city and the county. You know, how we designate them and how they get mapped eventually is up in the air. But I while we're in this area, I figured we'd want to look at those kind of things.
Yeah.
Hey, Doug,
So
can we
just-
double check that piece of blue there? That little piece of blue in Dundalk, that doesn't seem to make sense.
You mean right here?
Yeah,
That's on the city side.
right, I know. But that doesn't look right to me. I know you didn't do it, but,
No, yeah, all I did was steal their data and put it over here.
right.
So,
Anybody else know if that's legit or not, or?
Not to my knowledge.
I'm going to go on the GIS. Sorry, it's Lewis. I'm going to go on the GIS that the city has right now and just see what it shows. Just give me a couple minutes. So,
Because I think that probably has a pretty big bearing on how we talk about our side of it.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
here's the city's official map. And they are showing on their map there, those two little
Yeah.
pieces of Dundalk Avenue.
Hmm.
So,
Might be right, it stood out to me.
yeah,
If they're coming up Dundalk Avenue to the north, they get to there, what are they supposed to do? There's nowhere to go.
Doug, what's the pink right there for industry? What industry is that right there? So
it's part of a industrial park. I have no idea what the park name is, but it's part of this little industrial park that's right here.
Doug is right. Absolutely. On the GIS that the city has, it does show exactly as he has it. I don't know if that, you know, is necessarily a mistake, if it was a mistake or if there's some unusual reason. Yeah.
I know it wasn't Doug's fault.
Could have been. That's why I ask people to look at what we do. Anyways,
So
okay. Go ahead.
can I just want to make sure we're sort of solid on what we're doing on that? It is the decision point on the table to mark it as a preferred route or not mark it as anything, right? Because it sounds like we don't want to necessarily mark it as something directing trucks away from it, but is it not a good idea to mark it as a preferred route if it flows into a city restriction?
City route. Right.
And I think this is sort of a bigger question about how we want this to be utilized. And I think it's kind of a subjective, or there isn't really a wrong answer. It's just a, how do we think it's going to influence behavior? So.
I'm talking too much, but I'll give you my opinion. If Doug turns on the restricted routes in the county, it makes it pretty obvious that Halliburton is the route they want to use. And I would not suggest showing that. It's kind of obvious. Because once you start showing it and people find out about it, they're not going to be happy if you're calling their road a truck route. That's just my thoughts from dealing with people with traffic engineering over the years.
Yeah, well, I think Greg's right about that. That this is how it's been, and people are accustomed to this not being designated, and that makes sense to just maintain that.
So then in whatever our report and however we wind up documenting this in addition to a map, do we want to say that we explicitly looked at connectivity with the city routes and made decisions to not extend truck routes over county roads to larger roads?
I think that's important for everyone to know that we took that into consideration as a part of the decision-making process, for sure.
And that we evaluated it right on a somewhat of a case-by-case basis, because I don't think you want to universally say it like that, that we looked at some areas where connectivity made sense and others where it didn't because of the different sort of demographic nature of how the neighborhoods, right? So that and the like, and how that land is being used in the county, which might be different than the city.
Yep.
Okay, I'll go ahead and move up just to the northeast corner of the city county, and then go over to the southwest side. And I think we've already talked about things like US 1, 43, the interstates and all that. So is there any other concerns or areas that we need to think about now? Like this one little piece of, it looks like it's 558 here. Do we need to, this piece of Kenwood Avenue, do we want to exclude that as saying that's a truck route?
It's part of a state road. That's a key route to get into the city there.
Well, except there's no way, for us, let me zoom in a little bit there. So the state road extends to here.
Right.
Oops, wrong button. And then it becomes county road. So are we suggesting that we want to use Kenwood Avenue and Fullerton Avenue here to connect that into this US route, one route, or do we want to say that this might be a place where we subtract part of a state route to say, no, you can only really do that, but there's also no access to the Beltway or 95 from this area right here. So you can see this Kenwood Avenue here, even though it's a state road, it really doesn't do much. It would get, if we left it so that they could go from 95 south, it would get this little piece of manufacturing here back down to a road where they could get onto the interstate. But if you let them go north, then you're back into the whole, residential neighborhoods and all that kind of stuff.
That's how you're connecting 7 to Route 1, which are 2 major routes you want to connect up.
Okay.
My opinion.
So then, which way do we tell them to go? And once again, you're talking about, or do we just not say anything and let them pick whether they go to Fullerton or Kenwood?
I would definitely say one is not to pick one.
Okay.
If you pick one and not the other, the other side will get nuts.
Okay.
I
So
would
we're not
tend to
gonna-
leave it alone and just let them pick.
Right. Okay. Because we have some of these, what I would call, for lack of a better term, a weird spurs that are out there in the marketplace that, I want to make sure we consider them as they're available in these areas on the map. So, anyways.
So for documentation purposes, are we calling them both preferred routes, or we're just not denoting anything for the map?
Sounds like we're not denoting them.
Great, thank you.
Agreed.
Okay, so I'm going to wander now over to the southwest side so we can look over there and make sure we, accomplish those 2 areas that we were talking about. So here's sorry, wrong way. Here's that southwest area of the county. Of course, we've got 95, 895, 295, all that over here. So 195 is over here as well. So there's other state roads here. Here's one that in theory is not going to do much, which is Annapolis Road. It's a state road. The city is not connecting Annapolis Road up. And so the question would be, do we want to leave that one in as one of the routes, or do we want to take that out?
Since it's not connecting anything,
Yeah.
I would think we would take it out.
Okay.
That's
And then-
just me.
Sure.
So I'm not, can I just ask, so, I don't know what the use is. Is John on at all, or did he not make it? Because maybe he has a better sense since he lives in that area, about that. I hesitate to take something out if we're not getting complaints about it, just not knowing how the utilization is.
I'd agree
I
on that
guess
one,
my-
folks. Sorry.
Say it again, Greg.
I would definitely agree with that. I think we got to review it a little bit more before we take anything out.
So I guess the question is the sort of the ghost designation that we can give stuff here is to not name it anything at all. And I think we certainly wouldn't want to put that as a
Primary.
or a route for restrictions or anything, but is it best to do here what we said on Dundalk Avenue, take it away, or do we just not have the information on hand to do that?
Well, again, it's a state route. We can't do anything with it anyway. And if the
Right.
state hasn't restricted it, I say we just leave it there as is.
Then I would come in and say, but where do you want me to go?
It's weird that the city side doesn't seem to have anything designated there, which most of their stuff is really built out.
Yeah, it's not restricted at the city line. It still continues on up to wherever they're going in the city.
Mhm.
If I can jump in here real quick, with Annapolis Road, in the 20 plus years that I've worked that area, both on a state and county level, I have never once got a complaint about, trucks on Annapolis Road. And I think mainly the reason is they understand you have industrial parks right there across Patapsco Avenue in the city. And once you cross into Baltimore County, I'm going to say from maybe Daisy Avenue down to the 895 overpass, it's a stretch of road where there is residential, yes, but then you have large manufacturer businesses right there on the other side of that overpass before you go into Anne Arundel. I'm sorry, right before the overpass, before you go into Anne Arundel County. So that's their only way to be able to get from Baltimore City to those businesses in Baltimore County without having to go completely around into Anne Arundel County to come back up into Baltimore County. And we've really never, to my knowledge, ever received a complaint down there.
Okay, that's really good input. Then it sounds like we should leave it as a
Yeah.
preferred route.
Okay,
I think that's your answer right there.
yeah, I was just raising stuff like that because one, there's no connectivity in the city. And it while it might be serving this little industrial manufacturing area down here, there's really nothing at the northern end. And so in the southwest quarter, we do have a couple of, and I don't know if this is a conversation we need to have with the city to get them to designate this area right here as some kind of route. The same thing with going on here. We've got a state road that comes up to this location here, and it doesn't connect with the city till up here. So that's all I was trying to raise is, when I get all this stuff on the map, I can see the patterns and see the anomalies and the artifacts that don't connect in. So, anyways. So
Can we take a look at I'm not sure what road that is, but the one that has some state restrict that flows into the city where the city
this
has
one right here, this one right here.
Yes. Yeah, what road is that?
Let me see what I've got. I didn't
Oh,
pick
it's
up what
Southwestern.
I didn't pick up what the restriction was in the hold it. No, that is the restriction date. I didn't pick up what the restriction was. I'd have to try to look it up in the PDF.
Hammond's Ferry, maybe?
This is, let me zoom in on that area a little bit. No, not Query Dove. Sorry.
Washington Boulevard?
Yeah, that's it. I'm sorry.
Yep.
Yeah, I didn't put any notes in here to say, oh, it's a vertical clearance restriction. And I'm sure what it is, it's probably a vertical clearance over here at the, where 95 is. So once again, I want major road to major road. I didn't say the restriction is just down here at the bridge. I said, okay, you got to go all the way up to the next, because I don't want somebody to, like I said, come up to the bridge and then sneak into the neighborhoods. So that's why this one is probably as long as it is, but I'm betting the restriction is right here at the interstate.
Gotcha. All right. Thank you.
Sure. So it sounds like all the state roads are game through here. We've got, 195 Rolling Road coming through here. We've got Wilkins Avenue coming out of the city. There's good connectivity there. We've got Frederick Road coming out of the city, going all the way through to Catonsville, all the way through to Ellicott City. And I know that trucks still, even though the cake mix factory closed down here, there's still trucks that are using this to go through to Ellicott City. So, and Ellicott City and West. So I'm assuming that would stay. We've got the US 40 here, the rest of the interstate. We've got the I-70 coming in and going into the city line. And then this is 122, so that's Security Boulevard coming around. I'm assuming there's no objections to leaving any of those being proposed
they're good.
routes.
They should be good. When needed.
Okay. So then as we work our way up the western side of Baltimore County, you've got 26, certainly 140, the interstates, of course. One question I would have, is this kind of an artifact spur out here in western Baltimore County? It goes out to Woodstock, which is, give me a second, this is Old Court. This is the part of Old Court that's a state road. You can see there's a little bit of manufacturing in theory out here. It's manufacturing zoning. I don't know exactly what the activity going on is out there. But do we just want to, since it's a state road, we just want to leave it on our list? Or do we, is it something like that? We don't want to encourage trucks out that way.
I think you leave it alone, because if you take it off, they may venture out to other roads we don't want them on,
Okay.
my opinion.
So then as we move up to the northwest corner of the city, there's Liberty Road, Reisterstown Road. You got some state roads that wiggle across this part of the county, right under the Green Spring Valley area where the big, the Valleys Planning Council and all that is located. You've got these roads around the reservoir, or excuse me, this is Lake Roland down here. Here's another state road that doesn't interconnect with the city. And same thing with this road here. And then there's a third one right there. So, not that we have to connect with the city, but it sounds like as a group, we're saying, if it's a state road, just leave it and make it truck accessible.
Agreed.
Okay.
Yep, agreed.
So I can wander to the right here, going back this way. So is there the rest of the state roads are, heading out into the hinterlands, but in theory, we would still make them truck routes, correct?
Correct.
Right.
And so this is, you're seeing, let me turn on the county boundary to make that area a little bit tighter. So that's why these die at the Hartford County line, so to speak. And then if we look to the north, we've got this, here's another little one of these artifacts that go nowhere. And here's another one up here. But, the rest of the state roads are the state roads. The one big one that I know is it's not based on any real constraint of, width, height, or weight, is this restriction that's up here in the north end of the county on York Road, because they're trying to keep people from bypassing the weigh station that's up here. So they don't want people to come into Maryland, jump on York Road so they can get around getting weighed. And the weigh station, I think, is somewhere in I want to say it's just below this Maryland 439. It's somewhere down in there.
Yeah, I think you're right.
So they just don't want, so that's why they've restricted this piece. The state has restricted this piece of York Road. So like I said, I don't think there's any constraints on it. It's just that they want people to get weighed.
So then are you saying we shouldn't mark that as a preferred?
No, I think that's one where the state restrictions trump the county restrictions, and we don't countermand that.
Right. Okay.
Right.
Thanks.
And then this one over here, this little chunk of road here, this is saying it's a weight restriction. Apparently there's some structure in here that's got a, can't go over 47,000 pounds. And I'm betting that, it's something similar over here on this one. Yeah, this is another weight. It's 50,000 pounds. So actually the 50 is on the single and it's 62 on a combo. But those in theory are already in the state system and should be well marked. And once again, I mapped from major intersection to major intersection because there's no other way really for them to get through there. So, it's not just a point on the map where the bridge is, it's an actual, an A to B type of thing.
It's like from an intersection
Yes.
or an
Yes.
interchange, whatever you call
Yeah.
it.
So
Yes.
here I can zoom in on that for you so you can get a feel for it. So the restriction, I don't remember which one of these creeks, whether it's this creek here or this creek up here, but it's a bridge restriction, but there's no other way to get from here, way up here to way down there without taking that whole route. It's not like you're going to jump the truck or anything like that. So,
Well, right, and I believe that's like a trestle bridge or something, so that's why it's restricted. But
Right.
yeah, I agree with your logic 100% because
Okay.
the last thing you want, the last thing the driver wants is to go down the road, realize he can't proceed, and then have to try to turn a 53-footer around.
yeah.
It's not going to happen,
Yep.
at least on that road.
Okay, so Joel, we've talked about all the state roads and, we've got our opinion on the idea that we're going to say, yeah, all the state roads are proposed truck routes. Where do you want me to, and interstates as well, and US routes, where do you want me to go from here?
So I think we should jump then back to Sparrows Point and Dundalk and look at the restrictions that are in place. Make sure, well, I guess go over one more time. So really, the only thing we're adding in here that that it isn't a state road is on Holabird. Is that correct? Because they need that to get to the
They get to
Right.
Merritt Boulevard.
Yeah, we had talked about Holabird and Dundalk.
Right. And I think, this Dundalk is tricky, but I think because these routes we're going to call preferred are so on top of all of these clearly issue areas with restrictions that, that may be part of the camera discussion of we want you on Holabird, but as soon as you turn on to X, Y, or Z, that's where, we want to nab you. So I just wanted to note that while we make that designation, clearly it's near a bunch of other things. But I think the way we want to go next is really, I have really rough data from what, you know, we talked about several months ago with the areas of community concern, but it's really road names. And I want to, I guess the best example I have is Del Valle, right? Because part of that is already restricted, but is that piece south of Merritt also a community issue and therefore a ripe thing for us to say this is a spot you should avoid?
Sorry, before we move on, I just wanted to clear something up because Joel, you just said that we were including Holabird and Dundalk Ave as suggested routes, but I thought we were just leaving
I
those
appreciate it.
alone.
Thanks. Yeah.
No, I think Holabird we're including as a suggested, Dundalk we're
Okay.
leaving alone.
Great, thank you.
So Doug, do you think you could zoom in a little bit towards Merritt, where it reaches the city?
You're assuming I know the roads over on the east side of the city pretty well, but I'll start over here and then you can just say go south, go north.
Go a little south of that.
Okay.
So,
Yeah. So right, so that section of Del Valle is below Holabird there. I think this is a good example only because I have, you know, my very rough community survey results that say Del Valle. I don't know what that means. So you know, if Peter, Ron have input of, is there a major issue in that southern portion there where we essentially want to connect the restricted routes to say this section of Del Valle is not restricted, but we recognize that there is a constituent problem there?
I can answer that question, I think. The problem is if you, like I talked about earlier, if you go down to Fowler's Point and you hit Dale Vale, that's part of it that's the problem. The part that, I know you said that again, it's not Dale Vale that's the problem, it's the road behind the Fowler's Point. So basically what happens is Holabird, they come up Holabird, turn right on Dale Vale, and they can go straight through to Merritt. As far as I know, that's not an issue. That is not a HSE complaint. The complaint is they're skipping that and they're taking Fowler's Point, which is shorter, which is through a neighborhood, somewhat residential, and then they're turning right past, I guess where Dundalk High and all is, and going that way. As far as I know, the other route is that part of Dale Vale between, I guess, it's Holabird and where Fowler's Point meets, I don't believe is an issue.
I agree with that, Captain. Sorry.
I concur with the captain on exactly what he just said.
Because I believe even the councilman lives right in that area, and that's, he's not talked a couple times, so.
So for people like me who's not familiar, are we suggesting to put a restricted in a particular location so that they cannot go down that area that they've been going down?
No.
I'm trying to follow.
Now, what he's saying is that Fowler's Point that's there now, we
Yeah.
keep that, and we keep the other ones open as they are. However, we need that one and we need the other one on Del Valle. The problem is if you close one of them off the trucks, they all jump on the other one and then they take the whole brunt of all the truck traffic. So we don't want to do that. Right now they're split between the two and that's probably the best we can do.
So you're oh, sorry.
Right, if they fill up Holabird and they can't turn right on Dale Vale, then they're going to continue down Holabird to Merritt, and then they're going to try to backtrack to then get to Peninsula Expressway. So Dale Vale is an easier straight shot and it doesn't involve left turns. I think that's why it's more attractive and makes more sense.
Gotcha. Okay, that makes sense. That's helpful context. Let me see. I'm sorry. I'm looking at my list here.
So there's no new notation, correct?
Correct.
Right.
Okay.
So would that be a restricted area on the road not a restricted area, would that be a possible place for the monitoring? Because there's a road there that they often go down that we don't want them to go down anymore. Is that what we're saying? Because I don't feel like we did anything different with the map here to resolve that residential issue unless I'm just missing it.
Solomons Point would probably be a good monitoring
Right.
spot, I would think. Wouldn't you agree, Captain?
I do agree, absolutely. That's the crux of the issue there and nothing wise.
Right.
Yeah.
Dan, I would both agree with the captain and Greg on this.
So we leave that
Is
that
our
chunk alone.
highest
Sorry.
level of complaints with truck traffic that we, at least in the county executive's office, send over to the police to monitor. So I would agree with both of them on that.
I'd like to say
Sounds-
it depends on how many cameras we're talking about, because there are other places I think that needs photo enforcement more than Solars Point. I think Solars could be handled with a nice sign.
I assume we're gonna be rotating these things around at different sites like the speed cameras, so I think we're just saying this is gonna be one of the sites we want to consider in the rotation.
If that would be the case, if they're gonna rotate, sure, but it still needs a sign. I can't believe these truckers are making that right-hand turn on the Solars from Hollerberg on purpose. It's gotta be an accident. That's an awful hard thing to do.
Maybe their GPS is taking them that way, you know? I don't know.
Could be, but I bet you they're sorry they do it.
Yeah,
Are we sure they're not going up Willow Spring, which I think is another easier way to get there, and then making a right from there? You know this, Ron?
I don't believe they're doing Willow Spring. In one respect, it has 4 different speed humps, and in another,
Oh,
they'd have
okay.
they'd have to come off Dundalk Avenue and then make a right on the south. It would be a mess. I can't, that would have to be a total accident.
Okay, thanks.
Alrighty. Well, I think then the answer is we leave that spot alone. And then we come back to this when we talk about camera locations. Is there anything in this sort of central area around Holabird that Pete or Ron, you note as problem spots that are not currently restricted? Because I want to move south to Turner Station after this, but just in that area, I want to make sure we're covered.
Joe, I'm having some technical issues, so if you could repeat that question, I apologize.
So I was going to say next I wanted to move south to Turner Station, but just around Holabird, do you think the restrictions that exist, assuming we work on enforcement through cameras, are cover the places where there is really an issue, or are there non-restricted roads that you get a lot of constituent complaints about?
Now, I mean, I think we're fine there if we consider Solars Point a target for, like, cameras.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah, Joel, I'd like to say, just make a point. As far as Solars Point, cannot disagree. I haven't been there in a while, but it's not a place for a truck to be.
Mm.
Now, we have currently, the map is showing a restriction on Dunhill Road. I'm just going to throw this out there. When Broning Highway was reconstructed, we were able to successfully temporarily lift that restriction. In the event Broning Highway was backed up or for some reason blocked, as the only other egress out of the port. I think a lot of the problems that you're having a little bit north of there, Solars Point, et cetera, could be alleviated if you change that to a truck route up to Dundalk Avenue. So if you make it more convenient for truckers to get to Dundalk Avenue via that way, and as far as I know, the only near residential site is the American Legion Hall up there on the corner of Dundalk Avenue and Dunhill. Other than that, there's no residence there. It might act as an attractive way for those truckers that do need to get out of there for whatever reason, because of their delivery destination, rather than scatter through the neighborhood further north.
I don't disagree with you. If I can just tell you, we caught holy heck from those people when we did that before. Just,
Yeah, I don't really understand, Greg, because there's no homes there.
yeah, I know. I always thought it was a little weird, but I remember we did it when we thought, you know what?
Well,
Wait a
I
minute.
don't know. You know, the only homes you encounter are once you hit Dundalk Avenue, on the other side of the street. So I'm not sure. I'm just offering that up there. Putting it out there for you to consider. I don't know. It was very, very successful for us in those couple of days here and there when Broning Highway got backed up as an egress out of the port with little, if any, disruption.
Now, I'm trying to remember, is it restricted coming in or out? I thought there was only one way restricted,
Currently,
Dunhill.
yeah, Dunhill currently, I believe, is restricted both directions.
Okay, yeah, because I do remember American Legion. I think I'm stating myself here. I don't know, trucks were parking on their lot and they were cutting the turn short and using their lot constantly. I think that was one of the issues. I
That
thought.
was part of it.
You remember, Ron, specifically what else?
That's a possibility. Hadn't heard anything about that.
Yes, there was a problem with parking at the American Legion. There was a parking problem with staging trucks on Willow Street.
Right.
And I beg to differ about residential on Dundalk Avenue. When you come out of Dunhill and make that left on Dundalk Avenue, there's homes on both sides. Very few on the left side, but there's homes on both sides.
Well, it is, but trucks can traverse it now.
Well, when you live there and your living room furniture and things on the wall gets rattled and fall down, that seems to be a big issue. And I agree with him. It is a big issue.
I think part of it was that they were then going somewhere else, like Belfair Road, once they were leaving there. That may have been part of it as well.
Well, I don't know about that. Usually coming off of Broning Highway, we have a big issue with them going on to Belfair Road. Coming out of by the American Legion, they'd have to make a right and then a sharp left to get to Belfair. Again, these truckers aren't stupid. They don't want to work that hard. That would be a lot of work.
Yeah, and Belclair is restricted.
Well, it's supposed to be, but I don't know why. But truckers coming off of Broning Highway, if people are going straight through Belclair, and then they got to make that hard left-hand turn on Stowers Point where they don't belong. But I mean, they'd have to have traffic to back up an eighth of a mile so they could make that turn.
Well, it sounds like we might have found a candidate for another camera.
Absolutely.
But anyway, thank you for entertaining that. I just wanted to throw it out there for possible future consideration.
No, and we can also, this first report is really just a note taking of what happened, so far. It is a thing where we could just note your opinion without saying that the work group shared that whole opinion, and sort of note what the conversation was without comprehensively making a recommendation. So it's a good thing to point out so we know where folks stand.
Yeah, thank you. The silence was deafening. No, I'm teasing. I appreciate it. I think it'll help, but anyway.
So I do know a lot of the feedback we got in the community input survey talked about issues in Turner Station, and I know there are some restrictions already there, but are there problem areas that are not noted in light blue here that folks identify or know the constituents are really have brought to their attention?
I've never heard of Turner Station having any, that's just, you know.
Well,
Okay.
let me say, when a trucker misses his turn, they don't have a whole lot of choice but to go through Turner.
Hmm.
But that's the exception, not the rule.
Okay. Well, then we will leave this area alone as well. Doug, do you want to zoom back out a little bit? So I guess the broader question here, since we haven't identified any in the Dundalk area, is are we saying that in our map of places to avoid, that the places that are currently restricted, note where the problems are, and it's more of a we need to fix with enforcement through cameras?
I wouldn't disagree with that. I think that's a fair statement.
I agree.
I don't know about enforcement with cameras, but enforcement, yes.
Right. Well, and I think we'll at a later time we'll have to rank, and do what Ron was talking about to note where that is and isn't appropriate.
I don't know that we ever finished the conversation about signage, but there are a few spots that could use some good signage.
We can certainly do that, Ron. Revisit them.
So Joe, we probably have to have on the other agenda the recommendations on the signage part, so we don't let that one fall off.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, maybe depending on what next meeting looks like, we can dedicate some time to that. And if it doesn't make it in the halfway report, we certainly want to have that be a fully fleshed out topic in the full report.
Yeah, probably the full report more
Yeah.
so, I would think.
Okay.
If I can make a comment about signs, excuse me, Joel.
Sure.
We find that behavior is altered dramatically with positive reinforcement signs for our driver base. In other words, identifying truck routes through various means is a very effective way of keeping the trucks on the designated routes, as opposed to, not that that it's not needed, but as opposed to just simply posting no truck route here, no truck route there, can't go through here. Highlighting existing truck routes is we find on the trade side a very effective manner, because that's all the driver generally is looking for, where he's allowed, not where he's not allowed. Joel?
Well, I think maybe that's worth opening it up to the group and maybe adding to that piece, because I think, I know the flip side of that is folks in particular neighborhoods are not thrilled by the ideas of seeing those go up at their locations, but looking at this map, we aren't necessarily pointing to a lot of places that are residential in terms of where those would be located. So I don't know if that's a discussion for today or another time, but I think we would want some input and back and forth on that, and I think that's a good point.
Yeah, I'm certainly not suggesting every truck route.
Right.
Just the highly traveled ones, obviously. Thank you, Joel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I'll make a note, and maybe we'll have that be part of that signage discussion.
And again, that's when the state's got to come into play.
Right.
We're gonna put
Yep. That's
Yeah.
the other
routes.
complicating factor. Yeah.
And I think that's also why we decided a map, because a map, and actually a map in other ways, like a map that they can upload or have via Waze and things like that, as opposed to a static type map, so that they could have that available to them as opposed to signs.
Right,
Yeah, I
and
think-
information like that is typically transmitted a lot now and carried by the various telematics companies with the onboard computers that we use now.
Hey,
So yeah, that's highly effective.
sorry, this is Lewis. I apologize for being so in and out, but these virtual sessions in Annapolis are a little bit back and forth about when we're going to go. So I do want to highlight one area for a signage issue because I heard you guys talking about Turner Station. I don't know the status of signage there right now, but I know for a long time there were challenges on Mount Olive Road, which runs, parallel to Broning Highway and takes you kind of down into Turner Station and dead ends. And I know that community actually had to put up, at one point, they put up a handwritten sign trying to discourage trucks that, for whatever reason, thought that it connected to 695 and would get stuck down there. So I just share that because I know we have, BPW on the on the call, and so there might be a chance to take a look at what the current status of that situation is.
We can look at that. No problem, Lewis.
Thank you.
No problem.
Greg, just so you're aware, Mount Olive Road is a private road, and it turns into Main Street. I found out through DPW recently that Mount Olive Road is a private road.
Well, I had no idea.
That, now that you said that, actually, that recalls some of those conversations with their community, and I forgot all about that, so thank you. It's just very unusual.
The Mount Olive Road turns into, there's a section of Mount Olive Road that turns into Main Street. If my memory corrects me right. And that section of Mount Olive Road is private. It has a blue sign, and we recently just discovered it when it didn't get snow plowed. And after an investigation through DPW, turns out that the Maryland Transportation Authority has been maintaining that road over the years. But we don't, as of right now, we don't know who owns it.
Ed Reed, did you know about that with the signs?
Yeah, Pete's correct. It's private. We have it signed private.
Okay, cool.
Okay, well, with an eye on the time, I want to make sure we put adequate time towards the southwest side here. Is everybody okay with the official rough draft of our map essentially being what we talked about to the minute here for the Dundalk area?
I'm not sure what all you're considering the Dundalk area, and I would hope at some point maybe we could get some help from the state. But when you move on down towards Sparrows Point on North Point Boulevard, that's a problem there for Edgemere, and they need some relief so these trucks take the right route to TPA. Trade Point Atlantic, I'm sorry.
Can we zoom in and look at that for a second? So sorry, can you tell us one more time where they're going, where the issue is?
At some point before you get to Edgemere, we should have signage that points the direction of Trade Point Atlantic. Some of the truckers are going into Edgemere off of North Point Boulevard. And that would be, I believe that's Sparrows Point Road, I think.
I thought SHA was looking into that, Ron. Weren't they the last time we talked?
Well, they may be, but that's why I suggest maybe when we get to signage, we could have somebody from SHA join us.
Correct. Yep, I agree. I know it's been discussed with them. I don't know what the status is, though.
Okay, well then we'll note that for the signage discussion as well, because that is important. Are they going there by accident because they're just headed the wrong way, or are they?
Well, it's my opinion they're confused. There's no reason to do it deliberately, I don't think. But once they get there, it just creates such a mess.
Yeah, I agree with Ron. There's no good reason they should be in there. Quick count shows about a dozen trucking companies that are domiciled in the quote unquote Edgemere Avenue, but you know, I don't believe that they're active terminals. That area is, especially to outside truckers, those not familiar with the geography, is very confusing. So I would submit they end up there because they just plain make a wrong turn.
A
I
lot
agree,
of
and
the
that-
issue, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Let me just say, I agree, and that's why signage is so important. But I see the tripwire as the county versus the state, and that's why we need them in here with us.
Because I mean, like Ron said, a huge issue is down there is that they're making these turns into those communities right there in Sparrows Point, and they're basically all in the water, and they get jammed up down there, and they can't get out, and it causes major issues. And another issue is when you're coming out of Trade Point Atlantic to get on the 695, they think they're making that right to get on the 695, but they're actually going down North Point Road into North Point Edgemere where they get jammed up again. So
Yes.
some signage in that area would be very helpful.
Yes, done that myself actually.
Pete, it's my understanding that the state's already aware of that. They're working on 151, 158, 718. There's supposedly they're going to be re-signing all of that down there, but through SHA.
I didn't know where he was on it. Thanks, Ed.
Yeah, you're welcome. We brought it to their attention quite some time ago, as a matter of fact. Actually, probably back before COVID, they were already working on. We get a lot of complaints from the county portion of North Point that the truckers are getting down in there. It was my understanding that their GPSs were sending them down the wrong roads. So the state's aware of it, and they're supposed to be working on some additional signing.
All right. Well, anything else on? I'll say not done with the southeast or D7 portion here. That is merits discussion before we move over to the other side of the county.
Hey, Joe, I'm gonna throw out one for you guys to consider. Can you go up to like Essex area, Doug? 702. You guys go north a little bit, or move the whole map north, sorry. Yeah, I'm sorry, the other way. The other north. Where we got 702 coming off of 150 there. That's a restricted truck route. So what happens is they drop everybody off of there and onto the parallel road, which is Back River Neck Road. That's a mix of commercial and residential. And why they do that, there's probably some kind of memorandum of understanding or something. They had to do that when they built that road, but it really makes zero sense to make trucks do that. 702 can easily handle trucks. There's no residential housing on it. I don't know. It'd be nice to change that if we could, but I know it's out of our hands. But maybe that's something we talk to Wendy about, D'Andrea.
Yeah, Greg, I've never considered that, but you're right. I mean, heck, 702 has sound barriers on either side.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know why they can't just stay on that.
You're probably right. Probably some agreement that goes way back.
When they built the new road, no trucks ever would be on it or something, but I don't know. I just thought it was worth mentioning.
Nope, definitely worth noting for our findings, for lack of a better term. All right. Any last call on the side of the county here? All right, Doug, do we want to pull up the Arbutus area? Now, I know I may be asking folks to repeat themselves, but can somebody give me the quick version again of the the Benson Avenue issue and what the proposed solution is there, if there is one, or is it just enforcement?
Well, I can tell you it's a huge enforcement issue there. There's a lot of people try to cut through there between that residential area and the industrial area. And that's like one of our biggest complaints when this whole thing started with Benson Avenue.
Well, I will chime in here because it's been a thorn in my side for about 14 years now. And I think I've eaten more bowls of you-know-what about Benson Avenue than I've ever eaten in my career. And the issue is it's not all of Benson Avenue. It's the section of Benson Avenue from, I believe that's the 695 overpass, down to Sulphur Spring Road. If we could keep the trucks somehow off of that section of road, I think the public would be very happy, because that seems to be where we get the complaints from. And I know a lot of trucking companies come in, through Joe Avenue and the top part of Benson Avenue where the city line and county line meet. But once they get down, they take that shortcut, the cut through to Benson Avenue that's residential, to get to Sulphur Spring Road to dump out to Washington Boulevard to jump on 695, because they don't want to go out to Caton Avenue and jump on 95 or Caton Avenue to Washington Boulevard to grab 695. But it is a big issue there.
So can we see, I don't know the section of the map where we're talking about right there. I see Sulphur Springs Road.
Right where his cursor is. Yep, there you go.
Right there is where the issue is.
That's Benson, where the problem is. And it's all residential through there, and you got all industrial right above it.
Even though it's restricted to through trucks right
Correct.
now.
Right.
And I know, sorry, this is Lewis. I've talked to John about this a lot. And I think ultimately, this is a camera location, as opposed to any kind of designation of any change that exists, there right now.
Because can we just talk it out for people like me who don't fully get it? We already have it as restricted to local traffic. If we did a complete restriction, they couldn't get to the neighborhoods to do deliveries and things like that, correct? So there's no other option but cameras? Is that what we're saying?
It's a 3-truck restriction from Sulphur Spring to that end of the blue line there.
So DeAndrea, all routes are available to trucks if they have a pickup on or delivery there, right? So it is designated already as a restriction. They shouldn't be using it at all unless you had like a UPS truck that actually had a delivery at a residence right there on that section of roadway. That wouldn't be prohibited under any circumstances, no matter how you designated the road. In this scenario, though, what John's experiencing is a ridiculous number of UPS trucks primarily, and I know there are some others, but a lot of UPS that are coming out of their facility and going right down Benson and ignoring that restriction. And that is a problem we have not been able to successfully address, which is why we think it probably is ripe for a camera. And then the problem goes away really fast.
And DeAndrea, we've tried every attempt there. And Ed Reed's on the call. He can contest to this. I don't know if Keith Link is on here, but we even looked at that section of Benson Avenue that's residential to maybe put traffic calming in. But the volume of traffic is way too high to put traffic calming in there. So I think the only alternative is a camera there to be able to make this issue go away. Because I'm sure Captain Brown can contest that they have done a ton of enforcement out there with their truck unit, the traffic unit out of Precinct 1. They have done a ton of enforcement. It's just you can't correct ignorance, and that's what you have. And we've had this conversation on this call before. I mean, I've lit my own father-in-law up, who's a boss of a trucking company that sits right at the top of Benson Avenue. And he's like, look, we told them not to go down there. They get a ticket, it's on them. And they still continue to go down there. And it's very frustrating for the residents that live there, because that's an older community and those houses are older and they're starting to get cracks in their foundations because
Gotcha.
so many trucks are rolling through there. And
Mhm.
it's just, I mean, it's became a huge issue over the years.
So it sounds like a camera location to me.
Yep.
Andrew, just so you know, we've added some custom signing. I've gone all the way back as far as the off-ramp off of 695 onto Sulphur Spring. We have custom signs that we've never used anywhere else in the county. Advanced signs, trying to get a handle on this. This is our without a doubt, our number one truck complaint, non-compliance truck complaints. So in our opinion, that's probably our number one road for cameras.
Okay. Got it.
That sounds like a no-brainer, right? I mean, it's already restricted. Everybody knows what's going on. Not for anything, but it's great to hear that, not necessarily for the residents, but it's great to hear among this call that there's another place that has higher complaints than the Dundalk area.
We don't want any complaints. No.
Right.
No, we try not to have any complaints, but I mean, if I had to rate the two highest in Baltimore County, I would say that it's Benson Avenue and Wise Avenue, in my opinion, of working.
You're
in the
correct.
county.
You're correct.
Okay. All right. That was just my question. We can go on, Joel, because I know you timing us.
So then, are there issues? If memory recalls, there was some issue that John had brought up along the city line. May have been Joe, of somewhere that was an issue of city and county not lining up the right way. Does this ring a bell to anybody else?
So I think they line up the right way, because you have a no through truck restriction from like the Baltimore City line into the county. That part of Benson Avenue where Joe intersects, that's the Baltimore City County line. There's a sign there. I see it all the time. And then on the city side, they have signs all the way out to Caton Avenue. So there's signage there on both the city and county side.
Gotcha. Okay, well, I know that the Benson piece is the biggest piece on the southwest side. Are there, and I guess since John is not here, I'll have to lean on you, Pete, but are there other big problem areas that we should focus on for a few minutes here to at least talk through if they're camera worthy or other issues? Because the community input survey we got, I think it was over 80% of the ones in District 1 were Benson Avenue.
And for the sake of time, you're 100% correct. And other than a few stragglers every once in a while of a truck just making a wrong turn somewhere, camera, I would say for a camera, nah, that's about it. I mean, you get a few complaints here or there, but I mean, your survey was pretty much right on point.
Okay, that is good to know. And then, so to me, it sounds like when we look at the map that we're going to be turning over to Lewis and Armand and Jeff to distribute to their membership, we are basically, other than the few tweaks we made, going to be suggesting the state and interstate roads as the primary routes. We'll add Hollabard on the east side, and is there And can we revisit what we said about putting state restrictions as a layer on that map?
Thought we had to wait on the state restrictions. Did I get that right or no?
I don't see why we can't show them, right, Doug? Mary had them.
Yeah,
Oh, the state restrictions, yeah, because they're already there, yes. Because
Yeah,
we
Greg,
talked about
yeah,
that
you
at the
just
very
don't,
beginning that Doug would
yeah,
do some updating as needed, right? Yes, I'm sorry.
yeah, Greg,
We'll
I think
go
I
with
would
what
want
we
to go
have
through
now.
this with somebody with your staff just to make sure that I've got, like, you've got the issue with the Maryland 43.
Yeah.
Do that. And then I think I probably, because of the way I've mapped these, I certainly can describe the way I've mapped them, but I might also want to create a point layer that says, here's where the actual restriction is.
Yep.
So I think that might be helpful for some of these. And
Yep,
then,
agreed.
with that point feature, I could put, is it a vertical? Is it, width, what the purpose of that restriction is.
The other thing we gotta check, Doug, is some of them are probably temporary too, for construction, things like that.
Yep. Yeah, I just want to put a little more intelligence because when I take it off here, it doesn't make it look like there's a lot of issues on that Benson Avenue that we were all just talking about. But there's a vertical issue here somewhere in here.
Gotcha.
So that's, when I clicked on that earlier, it said, no, Doug, there's a vertical. I missed it this time. There you go. Benson Avenue's got some kind of a vertical clearance problem from between West Patapsco and Sulphur Spring.
Yep.
So, I want to, like I say, I want to make sure that I articulate those a little more clearly on the map. So,
We'll go through them with you. How about that?
okay, sounds good.
Okay, well then I think we sort of have our marching orders here for the biggest product, or the I should say the second biggest product we're turning over as a work group, which is this map, and then the first being our recommendations on camera locations and number of cameras. I think that this was productive for this sake and for those future conversations' sake, and I think that the upcoming meeting in March we want to dedicate to sending everybody the results of this ahead of time, letting them take a look to make sure it reflects what we said today, and doing the same with the report, which will really just be a summary of the work we've done to date. But I think that may not eat into our whole 2 hours, and if we want, since it's sort of flowing into it, if we want to talk camera locations at that meeting, we may have the time to do so. And so if I can put Ron on the spot, I know you've given me a list before of some problem areas, but if you have in your mind some of those sort of a ranking of the prime spots for cameras, if you would be willing to bring those to the March meeting for us so we can sort of have the same type of discussion but with more of a focus on those locations, that would be great.
Hey, Joe, just a quick question on that. Are we gonna consider putting these on state routes if they have a problem?
I guess, do we have any big examples of, I mean, I think when we looked through it today that we maybe struck a few from being called preferred routes, but did we have any state routes that were really at issue here?
I'm just saying, do we want to ask the state, like maybe York Road, they have a lot of violations up there. I have no idea. I'm just wondering if we've been considered or not. I'm just throwing it out there. So I know we have speed cameras and other things on state roads, so I didn't know if we wanted to venture onto them or not.
Let me maybe give that some thought and check in with you and DeAndrea
Yep, just throwing it out
after.
there.
Yep, no, I think it's a good conversation starter.
I do know that our red light cameras that are a lot of times in intersecting state roads, when you try to have them put in, it takes a long, long time. I mean, aside from the installation, it's just getting approval to the state. So we may want to think long and hard unless we have a road that actually is problematic to even try that route.
Right. But if they want us to do it, they can streamline the process, hopefully.
Okay, I will.
I think part of it is who gets the revenue. I think that's what I was told. The revenue comes to the county, so the state's not in a big hurry to do it. That's
Yeah,
what
could
we
be,
come across.
could be.
Okay, well, I think we're ready to close. I think the next 2 weeks or so for me will be to turn the report, which I sort of have an outline format, into a something more fleshed out, so that I can give the work group a time to look at it before the March meeting, and Doug will sort of finalize what we talked today with Mia. Doug will connect offline to make sure we're doing that. But basically, that those are our marching orders. So I'll turn it back to DeAndrea to close.
Well, this was a huge lift, a lot of work that was done on it in advance in order for us to be able to get through this process today. Again, I want to thank DPW, Doug and Ed and Greg and those for their advanced work on this. And it's very much noticeable in order for us. I'm really excited that we really got this map done, and it's in the level of detail that it is. And I'm excited to be able to share that, with the city, to say, how far we've come in this process. So I thank you all again. I thank the committee for the work that we've done to this time. I'm excited about the fact that we will have a report done by the end of this month. I must say I was definitely worried about it when I was first asked to chair the meeting. I was like, oh my God. But how far we have come with the work here, but we still have a lot left to do in terms of the cameras and the ticketing and enforcement part of this whole process. So I thank you all for the work that you have put into it so far. And I'm gonna thank you in advance for the next second part of the work that we're gonna carry on after this. And I think that we're probably going to continue at the same pace in terms of the meetings. And if we feel like we're getting the work done in advance, we will back up on the meetings a little bit, because our second portion of our report, our final report, is due in August. So for right now, we're going to keep with the once a month meetings. Well, it's not really once a month, it's like every 4 or 5 weeks. We're going to keep with that if it's good with the team. And I think we'll speed up a little bit as we get to the second part of the project. But any comments or suggestions from the team on things that you would like to talk about or see that we do moving forward with the second part of this process that we have been charged to carry out?
Is there a target date to put the first camera in operation, or we're not that far along yet?
No, we're nowhere near that yet.
Just asking. That was one of the things, goals or whatever.
So the authority doesn't start till October 1st, anyway, of this year. So, yeah.
What was that, Joel? I'm sorry.
October 1st is the earliest under the law that passed that the county can implement them. Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Right, and keep in mind that we'll have to turn our recommendations into local legislation, which will add its own 1 to 2 month process that usually takes, beyond the actual drafting of it, which I will leave to the lawyers to tell me how long that will take. So there will be a little bit of gap after the end, but I know that this is important to constituents, and we'll move as quickly as we can move when we get to that point.
Right. In consideration for the procurement of the the software, the cameras, or whatever we're going to use is also part of, something that we need to consider when we turn in the recommendations, because enforcement is one thing, but you need the software and the cameras to be able to do it, and we'll probably have to procure that from what I can tell at this point. Yep.
Yep, sounds good.
So, anything else from anybody? All right, hearing none, I appreciate the work that we've done today. It was a huge effort, and I think we've done a yeoman's job in making sure we were able to get the maps together. So thank you all, and enjoy the rest of your Friday, your weekend. Yeah, thank you all.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
All
Goodbye,
right,
everybody.
bye-bye.